Welcome back to another episode of the Muster Room Podcast.
Here we are.
This is going to be episode 7, our second episode of the 9/11 series that we're doing here. For those of you that are watching on YouTube, you can see the background. We're currently in the base of the South Tower, in a classroom inside of the 9/11 Museum.
Yeah.
It's a very
humbling
experience for sure. This is my first time being here at the 9/11 Museum. I know it's the first time for you as well.
Yeah, I haven't been back here since October 2001.
Yeah.
That's the last time I've been at Ground Zero.
I've never wanted to be here. Never was in my things to do.
Yeah.
But knowing who the two individuals that we're interviewing today, I figured this was the perfect spot to do it.
Absolutely.
And for those of you who are not watching on YouTube, if you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, whatever it may be, to give you a little picture in your mind, we're in a child's classroom. And there's a lot of paintings that the kids have done with the towers in the background, American flags, rainbows, and on the wall it says, "No day shall erase you from the memory of time," which is one of the sayings that's on the larger wall outside. And there's also the Statue of Liberty, and there's a bunch of flags from countries across the world that are here that were painted by kids. And some children's book. And actually one of the books behind us, or behind you, Will, is The Fireboat, which is interesting because we were on that boat last week. We actually, episode 6 was shot on the Fireboat, not knowing that the book was going to be right behind you. So shout out to Jessica Dulong and the crew from The Fireboat for allowing us to do that interview as well. That was a great interview. But before we start, I do want to say this. The next 2 episodes, episodes 7 and 8, are going to focus on some pretty heavy topics, specifically to 9/11 and the rescue efforts that took place at Ground Zero. For those of you who are listening or watching, it could bring back some unwanted memories. I just want to put that out there as a warning for those who are going to be listening. If this potentially causes any type of PTSD, I would advise maybe to not listen, honestly.
Right. And we'll always have a phone number, and somebody you can contact if you have you need to talk to somebody. So that's always included in our podcast.
Yeah. So with that being said, we're going to jump right into it. So our guest for part 1 of a 2-part series that's going to occur between episodes 7 and 8, Will Jimeno. Did I pronounce that correctly?
Yes.
Okay, thank
Nice
God.
job.
I've been really worried about that.
You've been obsessing over it since before we started.
I'm really worried. All right. Retired Port Authority police officer who was buried in the rubble after the collapse of the towers.
Such an amazing story.
An unbelievable story. And following up after your story is Scott Strauss from the NYPD Emergency Services Unit, who helped with the rescue of
my hero.
Your hero.
Yeah.
My hero, too. Scott's a good friend of ours. Known Scott for a few years now. Looking over my shoulder.
Scott, you're my hero too. So.
Beautiful bald head of his, which I shaved mine after. And we're going to get into Scott's story as well. And then we're going to combine both stories together at the end of episode 8. So for those of you that are listening, make sure to tune in for that episode as well. So Will, tell us a little about yourself, how you got into law enforcement.
All right. And before we start, just to hit on the PTSD part, if you are experiencing any type of PTSD, I'm going to advise you, contrary to what was just said, listen to this podcast, because what we're going to deal with is the aftermath and what I had to deal with PTSD and how I've been able to live a good life. And we'll get into the books that I've written, one particular, Sunrise to the Darkness, that deals with just overcoming darkness. And that goes in the line of work we are in. You know, there's so many people that I've met, so many different stories, and some have been tragic and terribly. And I'm thankful to say that through me speaking and meeting other people, I've been able to help fellow officers to strive to do what I did, was battle back to have a good life, because we all deserve happiness.
Yeah.
Starting off on me, I came from Colombia, South America, and I was 2 years old. My parents settled in Hackensack, New Jersey, 12 miles outside New York City. Grew up going to Catholic school and being instilled for a love of this country. My country of Colombia was a great country, but my parents came here like every other immigrant, seeking what this country offers you, which many, many countries throughout the world do not. And it's the freedoms we have here, the opportunities. And my mom, God bless her, today she still has a crazy accent. But she always said, we're going to learn English. We're going to fly the American flag. And as an immigrant, I'm going to bring the good things from our culture to make this country a better place. And that was something instilled in me. Growing up, was watching, Adam 12, The Blue Knight, watching all the Vietnam War movies. And I was just instilled as a young man of the courage of Americans to step forward when there was a challenge that needed to be met to secure our freedoms and the safety of fellow Americans. So without question, growing up, I knew what I wanted to be. And since a young child, I just wanted to be a police officer. Went to Hackensack High School, played soccer. It was time to go to college. And my dad wanted me to be a doctor. I said, Dad, I'm not that sharp. I said, but what I do want to do first is I want to serve this country. So I ended up joining the U.S. Navy. He tried to talk me out of it. I said, no, I'm going to serve this country. And it was one of the greatest things for me. I ended up what they call the Gator Navy, where we carry Marines. I was on the USS Tripoli LPH-10, was the only ship in the first Gulf War that got hit by a mine. I had gotten off the ship 4 months beforehand. But those 4 years in the military gave me the chance to go to 11 different countries, meet 11 different cultures. And one of the things I understood was that, all the politics, all the craziness that happened in the world today that drives us crazy, that's all the governments. People are people, and people are kind to each other. We bleed the same, we cry the same. We want to see our kids be happy. And I really absorbed that from all these different cultures. I also, one of the things absorbed was that every time we pulled back into San Diego, that's where we were out of San Diego. As a 19-year-old sailor, when we came back in San Diego Bay, I just knew, as well as all my friends, this was the greatest country on earth. Loved going to the different countries, loved seeing the different cultures. But when we got back here, the USA, just there's nothing like it.
Yeah, I was in the Army for 6 years. I agree with you. I was overseas. And when you get back here, you're like,
and that's why I always say Tony Blair, the old Prime Minister of Great Britain, said, any country more people are trying to get into than out, they're special. And that's us. That's the United States.
Exactly.
So after the military, I came home, came back to Jersey, where I was planning to be a police officer in Hackensack, New Jersey, where I grew up. Great department. Started taking civil service tests. And I'll be honest with you, it's a story that I also use for young people. It took me 6 years to become a cop. Between the civil service test, politics, this and that. But I kept trying. During those 6 years, I ended up meeting my beautiful wife, Allison. We ended up getting married, had a little girl named Bianca. And it was toward the end where I got called for the Port Authority Police, which for those that know the Port Authority Police of New York and New Jersey, we're a bi-state agency. We are in charge of basically all the transportation facilities on both New York and New Jersey. So we have the Lincoln Tunnel, the Holland Tunnel, the Goethals Bridge, the three major airports, Newark, LaGuardia, Kennedy. We have the bus terminal where I worked, the George Washington Bridge, the Port Authority PATH train, as well as Port Newark, and the World Trade Center. That was owned and operated by the Port Authority and protected by the Port Authority Police on 9/11. And getting on the Port Authority Police, the joke is you have the FDNY, New York's bravest. You have the NYPD, New York's finest. And then you have the Port Authority, New York's richest.
I knew you were going to say that. And a big smile on my face. I knew that was coming.
What I loved about it was I ended up going to the academy, 6-month academy, working with guys from both states, and ended up in New York. And it was a great place because I was an active officer. When I got there as a rookie, I associated myself with cops that wanted to work, were willing to teach me. They were busting my chops. I would have a collar and they would rip up my report, say, can you check my report? And they're like, yeah, start over again. But, by them doing that was just making me better. They were teaching me all the ins and outs, of being a cop. Right. And I loved it, and graduated, like I said, from the academy, graduated January 19th of 2001 at the World Trade Center at the Marriott.
Wow.
We were the 100th class, and it was special, and I had attained my dream, of 6 years of trying to be a cop. And I ended up as a Port Authority cop. And next, I'm at the bus terminal, baptized by fire, which I loved. The time leading up to September 11th, I got taught so much in such a short period of time, that I know that if I was on another department, I probably would not have as much activity as, being in Midtown Manhattan. But 6 weeks before the attack, I really attained what I felt was the American dream. I had my beautiful wife, had a little girl named Bianca. Like I said, she's 4 years old. My wife was now pregnant with our second child. I had the job of my dreams, and when I say the job of my dreams, not particularly the Port Authority, it was just being a cop.
Yeah.
never did it for the money. I did it because I wanted to help people. I wanted to make a difference in my community. And the Port Authority allowed me to make a difference, in 2 states.
Yeah.
But like I said, the dream really came when 6 weeks before the attack, we bought our first home in Clifton, New Jersey. And I thought to myself, man, everything my parents told me about this country has come to fruition. And, we were living the life. We were very happy. September 11th was a normal day, as everybody knows, beautiful day, not a cloud in the sky. I was working day tours. That's where I was steady days. Got up regular morning, got ready for work, went into the bedroom, kissed Allison goodbye, kissed her belly goodbye because she was now 7 months pregnant on September 11th.
Yeah.
Went into the next room to Bianca, kissed her goodbye. And I literally every day would skip down the stairs of my house and get into my old truck that at the time, even as a rookie, even as a Port Authority cop, money was still tight. So I had duct tape on a broken side view mirror. And it took me 20 minutes from Clifton, New Jersey to get into the bus terminal.
How long were you on the job before?
Actually on the street, 9 months.
9 months.
9 months. And, those are 9 months that I'll always treasure, and because I was doing what I wanted to do since a child. And, but I got into the bus terminal, went in, and this is something I think everybody can agree with. I've had the pleasure of meeting people from presidents on down. Mm-hmm. And I always tell the kids, and I tell people, no matter who you're with, if you spend enough time with them, you'll realize that we don't outgrow high school.
Right. Oh, yeah. Especially the police department.
Especially the police department.
Yeah.
Went downstairs to the locker room, and it's like, oh my God, I'm back in Hackensack High School. Yep. People are just bullshitting, doing stupid things. And but it was great. We put on our uniforms and we went up to what's roll call. For those that don't know what roll call is out there that's listening, that's where we're giving out our assignments at the beginning of every tour. We're giving information, giving out our posts of where we're going to be and what we're going to be doing.
You do it in a room called the muster room.
Yeah.
That's why we're called the muster room.
Went upstairs. We went up to muster and we were given our assignments. My assignment that day was post 35, which would be between 42nd and 41st Street and on 8th Avenue. So I had the front of that building. Not a big deal. For whatever reason that morning, the guys, we didn't get coffee or anything because usually right after we'd go get some coffee and talk. But that morning we just all went out. And I'm standing in front of between 41st and 42nd on 8th Avenue, looking at the doorways of what we call at the bus terminal the rush. So you have a rush in the morning and you have a rush in the afternoon. What that means is everybody's coming into the city from New Jersey, Connecticut, upstate New York, other parts of the city, and it's thousands of people coming through these doorways, right? And in the afternoon, you have the opposite. So on that morning, I was standing there. I was leaning up against a post, one of the taxi posts, looking toward the doorways with 8th Avenue behind me. And it was just a normal day. And our jobs there are we're strategically posted so we can make sure, A, people are safe, give information to people, give aid, God forbid there's a medical emergency. And it was just a normal day. So see all these people coming out. And as I looked over toward the corner of 42nd and 8th Avenue, I could see Sergeant Ross along with a fellow officer, Pat McNerney and Eric Sanchez. And I was under an awning. So I was standing there when I kind of glanced over and I see Sergeant Ross pointing at something up in the air and he's following it with his finger. And I'm watching him like, what's he doing? I didn't hear anything, but when I looked over to the corner of 42nd and 8th Avenue, for those who have not been in New York City, an intersection in New York City is pretty large, but all of a sudden this large intersection went dark. A shadow just came over. And he was following. And again, I didn't hear anything, didn't think much of it. So I went back to doing my job. Several minutes later, our radios crackle and our radios saying, all units 840 the police desk. 840 for us, it means everybody come back to the police desk. All officers return. So that was only done maybe once in the 9 months that I was there. So this was kind of not a unique, it was odd. So I started walking down 8th Avenue, across 41st, and got to my fellow officer, Dominic Pizzullo. Dominic was between 40th and 41st. Dominic was just a great guy. Dominic, unlike me, did not grow up wanting to be a police officer. He was actually a teacher in the Bronx, high school teacher. He came over for the financial reasons and the insurance for better for his family.
He wanted out of.
But in those 9 months, no, he didn't want out. He just wanted a better life for his family.
Yeah.
But in those 9 months leading up to the attacks, he really, I remember talking to him. He said, my high school kids would come back at night by my house and beg me to come back to be a teacher. But he said, I got a new family. And in those 9 months, he really understood and learned what it meant to be part of the Thin Blue family. Yeah. It was like, we're brothers. And just to tell you what kind of guy he was, for me, when I moved, I needed time. I needed like a whole week off. And I didn't have, just a rookie. But we're able to do swaps. We have, personal days. And Dominic was one who was known for not wanting to do swaps because, when you give a swap, you're going to have to pay it back and then you're going to have to work more days. But he said, Willie, and beside my mom, he was the only one that would call me Willie because I go by Will. But he said, Willie, you know what? You're moving, it's your family. I'll take it. Don't worry about it. And we did. He helped me to have that week off for my move. So we started walking back and he's like, Willie, something bad must have happened for them to call us all back. And as we're walking down the main part of the building toward 9th Avenue where our police desk is, we're just kind of chit-chatting like, yeah, what could it be? And at that point, the news had not reached the bus terminal. And the reason I know that is because my wife had a friend who actually saw me walking back with Dominic, got on the subway and ended up showing up at the World Trade Center. And he was really affected by it because he saw bodies falling.
Yeah.
And so nobody at the bus terminal yet really knew what happened. So when we came back to the police desk, I started walking around the corner and I could look up. Our desk sits high and we saw the lieutenants, the sergeants. And one of the sergeants that I admired was Sergeant John McLoughlin. And I'll tell you why. One of the things I learned in the military when I was in the Navy was by senior sailors were, especially this one sailor that told me, he said, follow somebody into a bad situation that knows what they're doing because your percentage of survival goes up when someone actually knows their job, and his name was Smayback, bosun mate, second class Smayback. And that always stuck with me. Like, be good at your job, especially if you're a leader, because there are going to be people that are following you and their lives are on the line with what your decisions. I had been to several gun calls with John McLoughlin. He was very professional, but I saw concern in his face. And that got me going. I'm like, man, something really bad happened. We continued on into what we call our reserve room, our break room. We walked around the corner, big TV set in there, and New York 1 was on. All you see is Tower 1 with a big black gaping hole in it and just smoke coming out of it. So for those that are listening to this podcast, especially around the country, what sets the Port Authority Police apart from the NYPD and our brothers and sisters in municipalities in New Jersey is that we're a transportation facility. So if you think about terrorists, what do they want to do? They want to kill as many people as they can in one spot. Well, that's the Port Authority. The airports, the bridges, the tunnels, the PATH train. We were hit in 1993 and we were taught that in the academy, that's what sets us apart. We're still going to do the same jobs as everybody else, but we're a target-rich environment. And holy cow, this was happening. And I'm looking at the TV set like everything they said in the academy is actually happening.
Now, at that time, did you think that it was an attack or did you think it was an accident?
At that moment, I remember looking at TV set. I really didn't know because now I tell people, even back in 2001, the technology was enough that an airliner wasn't going to fly into a building, but Sergeant Ross was there. And he said, these are terrorists. It's an airline.
So he knew right away.
So right away,
because he saw the plane.
Right.
That's the plane he was following.
At it. Yeah.
I didn't know. And as soon as he said that, I just knew, okay, we're under attack.
Mm-hmm.
And, today I do speaking engagements and I talk to kids who weren't even born then. So I always make the joke that at that point I turned around and I grabbed the payphone because young kids don't know what a payphone is,
Yeah.
So I grabbed the payphone and I actually got through to my wife. And she was working in Carlsbad, New Jersey. And I got through to her because I had been at the bus terminal. We had some shooting incidents. We've had some stabbings and it made the news. So I would call, hey, I'm okay. So I did that. I just took that opportunity. I was lucky. She was asking me questions because at that moment in my mind, I knew two people. The director of aviation was a friend of ours, Bill Dakota, and there was another lady whose son I knew. So right away I'm thinking, oh my God, they're in the buildings. And she's asking me about them. I said, baby, I don't know. I just know the plane flew into the building. I don't know what's happening. At that point, our Inspector Fields, walked into the reserve room and said, listen up. We've commandeered a bus on 9th Avenue. We're going to start calling your names off. We're going to go down and help our brothers and sisters. Because again, we had a command there. So at that point, I just said, Al, I got to go. And I hung up. Later, she told me, she goes, that's the first time you ever hung up the phone without saying, I love you. Because my mind was the job.
Yeah.
And at that point, I remember we didn't wait for our names to be called. Mike Robles, a senior officer, started walking. Dominic and I followed them. We went down the stairs, got onto 9th Avenue. We got on this bus. You had all these civilians. They got them off the bus with their luggage. And I remember me and Dominic sitting toward the front of the bus, and we started going. Sergeant McLoughlin got in the Suburban next to us with the inspector and Sergeant Feely, and we were heading downtown. And as most people know, it takes a little time to get from midtown to downtown on a regular day. We were flying that morning. I mean, we were flying, and it was kind of funny. Because like I said, you still don't outgrow high school. The cops on the bus, we're still BSing. Like, I can't be an airliner. You know, people that didn't see it. It has to be a small Piper type plane. You know, we're all kind of jibber jabbing. Dominic's trying to call his wife on his cell phone. He can't get through. And, you know, I said, Dom, can I use your phone? And he's like, man, it ain't working. And we're just now getting a little concerned, you know, but we're still kind of BSing. When we get into the village and we get on through the village, we're coming on West Broadway and we're heading down. And it was 2 city blocks back. That's when the bus went silent. We actually looked and there was a guy in the middle of the road and there was an FDNY ambulance bus there working on him. And there was just blood everywhere. Something flew back 2 city blocks back and hit this guy. And that's when the whole bus kind of like, you knew it was serious. Mm-hmm. We went up another block and we stopped the block from Vesey Street. And I remember at that point, it was a staging area. We start getting off the bus, man, and I'll never forget it. I mean, I look up at the buildings and I see the tower on fire. Then I look at the other tower and I see the corner on fire. So in my mind, I thought, all right, the plane hit, it deflected something and caught the corner of the second tower on fire. What we didn't know was while we were en route, a second plane had hit. So what I thought was just the corner of the building on fire, actually there was a big gaping hole on the side that we didn't know. At that point, some of our sergeants and lieutenants were like, all right, everybody just stand by. We're going to figure out what we're going to do. There was us, there was NYPD, there was firefighters, but there was nobody from that point on toward Vesey Street. It was just like a war zone. It looked like Armageddon. And I remember just looking up, and that's when Ronnie Delmar, one of our senior officers who had been in the 93 bombing as a rookie, says, look, they're jumping. And I remember looking up, and that was tough. That was really, really tough because I saw people jumping by themselves. I saw people jumping, holding hands, and it just kept happening and happening. And all I can think about was like, you know how you take a rock and you throw it into a pond and there's that ripple effect?
Yeah.
Every time somebody jumped, that was somebody's mother, brother, sister. And in my mind, I'm thinking, this is what I grew up to be. I want to be a cop. I want to make a difference. And you felt like you're in front of the ocean. You felt so small. Here we are with our shields on, our gun belts on, and you start realizing, it hit me that day, I don't care how tough you think you are. You know, when something of that magnitude, we realize we're just small human beings. And what makes us strong is us coming together. And my heart was breaking because I would see the people jump and then they disappear behind Building 6. And I'm thinking to myself, we got to do something. We got to get up there, break a wall so they could see our patches and say, let's get out of here, you know? And that's when Sergeant McLoughlin came running up by himself, running up through this war zone. He had parked the Suburban up on Church and Vesey. So he came running up. He said, all right, I need guys that know how to use Scott Air Packs. For those that don't know what Scott Air Packs are, that's what you see firefighters wearing on their back. So as Port Authority police officers, we're cross-trained not only in law enforcement, but firefighting, because we're the first responder at the airports in our facilities. So we have to be trained in that. And I'll be honest with you, much respect to firefighters, I don't like fire. I'd rather be around 5-6 bad guys than I do fire.
Right.
But all I knew was Sergeant McLoughlin had asked for volunteers. And I don't know which of us said it first, to be honest with you. Myself, Dominic Pizzulo, as well as Antonio Rodriguez. And Antonio was a great guy. He had just come back from his first vacation from Portugal, where he's originally from. He was a veteran of the NYPD 4 years, came over to the Port Authority, again, for better money, better benefits for his family. But he was a city cop. And so basically, we were the old guys in the academy. Dominic was 35, just made the cutoff. Antonio was 35, just made the cutoff. I was 33. And Antonio was such a good guy. He would always make sure that he would look out for his fellow officer. Because we, as we always say, we're on our pins all day. We're not in cars as Port Authority officers all the time. We're walking around our facilities. We do have, of course, cars, but most of us are on foot. So he'd always say, hey, make sure you throw an extra bottle of water out in your back pocket. Make sure you got an extra handcuff key. He would always take the time to look out like a father figure to everybody else. And again, he had just returned from Portugal, and it was his first tour back, day tour. Because after the academy, he got thrown for afternoon tours, which he wasn't happy about because he placed high in the class. So this was his first day back. His wife later told me that, and it broke my heart that his first day back on day tour, this is what's going on. But the three of us volunteered. And we said, we'll go with you, Sarge. She said, all right, let's go. So we became a team of 4. And we started running. And we're going toward Vesey Street. And when I tell you, it's just destruction. It's body parts, debris, Rubble. And I remember, and I tell everybody this, I was fucking scared. We're running. Here I'm 33, been in the military, and I was scared because at the end of the day, we're human beings. But then I thought about something because as we're running, I look back and I just see everybody standing. I knew everybody would have jobs to do, but I was scared. And I look and I could see Dominic, I see Antonio's face, and I could see concern in their face. I know they were scared. But at the same time, I thought about, hey, I took an oath to serve and protect. And those people, they're depending on us. You know, it's important that we do our job. That could be my family up there. I expect that if my family needs help, when they call 911, first responders are going to be there. And that's what I remembered, my oath. So we got up on Vesey next to Building 5, and there's a doorway that led into the concourse level. Sergeant McLoughlin said, Jimeno, take our hats, our PR-24s, which you carried at the time, our memo books, run up to the Suburban, throw the equipment in there, come back and meet us in the E-room. E-rooms are set up throughout the World Trade Center. They're emergency rooms that have Scott air packs, helmets, everything a first responder needs to be able to help people in an emergency. So I ran up, came around the corner of the Suburban. Suburban had a big piece of concrete that slammed on the front of it. That's when I realized, hey, dummy, there's stuff falling from the sky. So I throw the equipment in, I got next to the building. That's when I looked down Church Street and I saw thousands of people just running like cattle. And again, I didn't know the second building, but I just knew people running. So I ran back, got into the building, and actually a lady comes running up to me and says, you got to get the kids out. I'm like, what are you talking about? Because I had been to the World Trade Center maybe 3 times on protest. I did not know the buildings. I didn't know everything in there. And apparently they had a daycare center. So I said, all right, ma'am, we'll get to it. I ran up to Sergeant McLoughlin. They were putting on their gear. I said, Sarge, we got to get the kids out. It's like they've been evacuated. So that made me feel good. All right, the children are out. We got into the E-room. All that was left was one bunker coat that fit Antonio. He put on his helmet. I put on a helmet, and so did Dominic, but there were no more bunker coats. So Antonio looked like a firefighter with a gun on his side, and me and Dominic looked like firefighters with guns on our side, and we checked each other. We checked our Scott air packs, and I could tell you my heart was pumping. I mean, it was going, but we were trying to stay focused, try to calm ourselves down. And one of the things we told each other is like, no matter what happens, we don't leave each other. We made a promise. And I remember at that point, I started putting on my perp gloves. And Antonio, again, being that father figure, said, Jimeno, don't put on those leather gloves. If we get near the fire, they'll melt on your hand.
Yeah.
Good idea.
Yeah, very good idea.
And this is because, again, things are happening fast and we had to slow things down. And just that type of advice, you know, is awesome. You know, that you have somebody who has that experience, 4 years on the NYPD, can say, hey, we're getting near fire, that stuff will melt. Took the gloves off. We asked Sergeant McLoughlin, what's next? So for those that, of course, don't know what the World Trade Center was or haven't looked into it, with 2 huge buildings connected by a concourse level. That concourse level was underneath. You call it a mall level. You had stores, you had restaurants, you had elevators and escalators that took you downstairs to the subway. So we were in that level, the concourse area. So Sergeant McLoughlin said, let's go. We're going down one level. We're going to our police desk. Got on an elevator, went downstairs, went into the police desk. I remember going to the police desk and I remember just seeing a piece of the plane that was brought in by our detectives. And it's funny how the human mind works, because I know a plane has now flown into the building, but to see the piece of a plane, it just wasn't registering, you know? And what's unique is if you watch the French documentary where those guys are walking around, they're walking with 2 Port police detectives.
Yep.
They're actually in there with us at the time. Mm-hmm. And if you watch that documentary, you'll see Sergeant McLoughlin in that video. We're in the room. So at that point, Sergeant McLoughlin says, hey guys, grab a mail cart, a mail cart that's canvas, start throwing more equipment in there. Get Scott air packs, get axes, whatever you can get your hands on. So we did. We loaded it up, and I'm pushing this cart from the police desk back onto the elevator, and we go up. And I remember just feeling that adrenaline, like, wow. So we push off, and we come into the concourse. There was some water in the concourse level. You could see some of the marble cracked. And we start coming around where the escalators to the PATH train and the subway were. And a lot of people ask me, what did you see that day? And I said, you know what I saw? I saw a lot of love. It sounds crazy. And I'll tell you why I saw a lot of love. There was a steady flow of people coming from Tower 1. They were being directed out. I remember seeing an FBI agent, and they were directing these people out. And I saw a black gentleman with a white gentleman carrying a blonde woman with a severe cut on her leg. And they were carrying her in a single file line. While at the same time, there were people who had been injured, had passed already, they were laying there, and these people were helping each other, total strangers. It didn't matter where they came from, color of skin, politics. These were just people helping each other. And I thought to myself, as a first responder, like, man, if these civilians can be this brave, us in uniform, we got to be like 3 notches above them. And we continued on and we followed that line. And when we made the right, you can either go straight toward Tower 1 or make a left and go to Tower 2. So it was a split. And we ran into another team of Port Authority officers. There was 5 of them, and it was 4 of us at the time. And as they came up, their sergeant was talking to Sergeant McLoughlin. I wish I could remember the 4 guys. The guy that was pushing their cart was Warren Stewart. He was actually an NYPD detective and my classmate as well, who had come over again for better, situation for their family. And Stewie was a great guy. I mean, like I always show his picture when I do speaking age because he had a smile that just light up a room. And he had his first little girl while we're in the academy. And I remember Sergeant McLoughlin talking to them. Me and Stewie were like, this is crazy. And they started pushing off. We pushed off. And I remember just punching fists with Stewie and saying, be safe. They never found those 5 Port Authority police officers, none of their remains. So that's always, but I was happy that this particular year I was invited by his daughter, Amanda, to be at her graduation. So
that's nice.
That was good. But we started heading toward Tower 2, and that's when we met up with Christopher Amoroso. Chris, there's a famous picture of Christopher. He was already helping people before he hooked up with us. He had saved several people. Most notably is the woman that they recently found out is from India. I always thought she was Spanish, but there's a picture of him bringing her out. And he came back into the building, and when he hooked up with us, we said, yo, Chris, you're all right, because he had been injured over his left eye. And he goes, don't worry about that. We got to get more people out of here. That was the mentality of the people that I was surrounded by, which I'm very proud of, to never forget them. And at that point, he said, Sarge, can I join you guys? Sarge said, yeah, throw on a Scott Air pack, let's go. So we started heading toward Tower 2. Again, we didn't know who was in distress. We get to Tower 2, there's a Ben & Jerry's ice cream store there. Sergeant McLoughlin said, Jimeno, stay here with the cart. The rest of you guys were going down to another level to get another, hit another E room where another officer, Jimmy Lynch, was. So they went down the stairs. Now I'm looking into the lobby of Tower 2. So it's glass doors, big revolving glass doors, and you can look in, and then you can see Liberty Street on the opposite side. And again, here I am, 33 years old. Think of myself as a tough guy, but I was scared. I was really scared. And I'm standing there by myself. I can see people who are dead now in the lobby. I see people injured. I see our guys on the opposite side of the lobby shooting out windows to let more people out. But the worst part of that was the sounds. I kept hearing the sound of concrete hitting, but then I could see bodies falling. And there's a distinct sound between the concrete hitting and a body falling and hitting the ground. And I kept hearing a lot of bodies, and it was just tearing me up. And I'm standing there like, this can't be happening. And that's when another fellow officer came walking up to me, Bruce Reynolds. Bruce was from the George Washington Bridge, senior guy. Only knew him because growing up in Hackensack, we have what's called the Bergen Record, Bergen County, New Jersey. And the GW sits on the Bergen County side. So unfortunately, the George Washington Bridge, one of our commands, people use it to take their own lives. But a lot of times our Port Authority cops are able to save people, and they would make the paper. And I've seen him a couple of times in there as being a cop that saved people. So I knew he had like 16, 17 years on the job because you had to be senior at that time to get to that command. And he walked up to me. He was short, black guy, bald. He was sweating. And he walked up to me, goes, Reynolds, GWB, George Washington Bridge. I said, Jimeno, BT, bus terminal. We talked for a little bit, and he says to me, you know what, kid? We're going to get a lot of people home today. And I needed that. As a young cop, even though I was 33, that senior cop saying, it's going to be all right. It's going to be tough, but we're going to get through this.
He must have seen the fear in your eyes and knew that he had to say something to you.
Whatever it was, I appreciate it because it gave me that, it's going to be a bad day because we knew we were in for some bad stuff. Mm-hmm. But together, we're going to get through this. And we talked a little bit more, and that's when the team started coming up. And he said, be safe, and he walked away. And as he walked away, he walked toward the command center of 2, where there was a bunch of firefighters, cops, and that's the last time I would see him. And they actually found him in that area after I told them where. They found him the following February, along with those firefighters.
The following February.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's when they. And I remember them calling me because, I had told them that. It was important to me to tell people what I saw. But at that point, we're ready to go. We're going to Tower 1 because, again, we don't know Tower 2 is in distress. And Antonio, being that father figure, says, Jimeno, with his Portuguese accent, you've been pushing the cart from the police desk here. You're not going to be any good if you're tired because we're now sweating. It's hot. And I thought, all right, good teamwork. So he switches with me. Now he's behind the cart at the 6 o'clock position. Chris Amoroso is to his left. Sergeant McLoughlin is at the 11 o'clock position. I'm directly in front of the cart, and Dominic Pizzullo is to the 2 o'clock, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock position. We got to go back down this hallway, make a left, and go toward Tower 1. We start going down the hallway. We stopped halfway down the hallway, and Sergeant McLoughlin is talking to some firefighters and EMT. And he says, listen, I just came up from the B1 level, elevator shafts are buckling, just to know. And the radio went off. So Inspector Field's asking us for our location, and Sergeant McLaughlin's telling him and saying, is there something wrong with Tower 2? And I happened to turn around to look from where we came, and that's when we heard a humongous boom. And when I tell you that everything starts shaking like out of a TV movie, so I grab my helmet and everything's shaking. As I look into the lobby of 2, all I see is the lobby being engulfed in a fireball the size of my house. And this is important. And why I say this is because as people progress in their law enforcement career or whatever first responder career they have, sometimes people get promoted because they have hooks. I'm going to be honest.
Sure.
Some people might not like to hear that.
Mm-hmm.
But the reality is I go back to what was said to me, follow somebody that knows what they're doing so you can, help people get back out. At that moment in time, I did not know what to do. I'm standing there. Sergeant McLoughlin sees something that I don't see. And I only learned about that 3 years after the event, after the attacks, because we talked about it. We never really talked about it till about 3 years later. And I said, Sarge, what made you tell us where to go? He goes, well, I saw a debris wall coming at us. He thought it was a car bomb. So he thought, what are they doing in the Middle East? They'll blow something up, bring the first responders in, blow something up and kill more of them.
Secondary IED.
So he thought, if I can get my team, which was a miracle where we stopped because there was a doorway to our right. He says, run toward the elevator. Like I told you, I'd been to the World Trade Center only 3 times before on protest, did not know the buildings. This man helped set up the security after 93 bombing. He knew the buildings like the back of his hand. So he says, run toward the elevator. Because in his mind, he said, if I can get my guys around this elevator, perhaps some of this, what's coming at us might be deflected. Maybe the elevator shafts, the beams. So Dominic starts running. I start running, and I can look over my left shoulder, and I see Sergeant McLoughlin coming behind me. We hit the hallway. Dominic's in front. I hit the hallway, and that's the first time I said, Will, what did you get yourself into? Because I see the lights flickering, and I see brown stuff. Today, I know what it is. It's actually the building coming down. I didn't know that at the time. And I'm running, and for a split second, I thought I saw light. Call me crazy, but I thought, oh my God, there's light. And then I thought, I can't save myself. I promised we would stick with each other. So I saw Dominic turning to the left. I follow him. That's when something big picked me up, threw me on my back. I ended up in a 45-degree angle. And I remember just getting bombarded with just concrete. Rocks are falling in. And what do we do as cops, right? Our first line of defense is our radio. Go for my radio. It was on my left lapel. I'm yelling 813, our code for officer down, frantically yelling 813, trying to keep calm because I remember your voice is everything on the radio. You got to be able to communicate. So I'm like, 813, officers down. We're at the trade center. We're in the middle of the trade center. And something hit my hand and I lost my radio. So at that point, I grab on for my helmet. And there's really no way to describe it. It's like a million freight trains coming down on you. And something hits my helmet and it rips it off. And I had a chin strap. I just ripped my helmet off. And then all I could do was cover up. And it's weird because it felt like it was happening forever. And then just went, whew, silence. I mean, dead silence. And I'm in the pitch dark. And all of a sudden, after a couple minutes, I look to my right up above me and I see like light starting to come in. There was a hole, 20, 30 feet up. It looked far to me. And light started trickling through. And then all I could see was like gray. And I could start seeing. And when I could finally see, there's only so much space to my right. And when I look, there's what I know today, a wall literally fell on me on my whole left side, leaving only kind of partial movement of my left hand. I could use my right hand, and it came down my chest and left my right knee up in like a 90-degree angle, and that foot was buried. When I look down toward my feet, all I could see is concrete. When I look to my left, I see Dominic buried right next to me. So his head was right next to me. And I'm trying to figure out what's going on. I'm in shock. I know at this point I'm in shock. And Sergeant McLaughlin's beyond that concrete wall at my feet on the other side. He's now in a fetal position, stuck. He's actually stuck. And he's caught where he can't move his head because his helmet. And after a couple minutes and, of silence and coming in, Sergeant McLaughlin's the first one that said, "Sound off. What's everybody's condition?" Always the professional. And so I said, "I'm stuck and I can't move." Dominic said, "I'm buried, but I'm okay." That's when I started yelling. I'm starting to feel pain because now the shock is starting to wear off and this concrete wall is now crushing me. And so Sarge says, "All right, try to get each other out." And I'm like, "Well, wait a second. Antonio Rodriguez's nickname was A-Rod and Chris, we always called him Chris." So I said, "Well, A-Rod, Chris." So I start yelling at the top of my lungs for probably 2 minutes. "A-Rod, Chris, A-Rod, Chris." And that's when Dominic said, "Willie, they're in a better place." At that point, we all realized that we just lost, 2 brother cops, 2 fathers, 2 sons, 2 good Americans. And I got to tell you that was difficult because it was really hitting me that they were gone. I mean, they were just completely gone. And you didn't need to be a rocket scientist to figure out what happened. At that point, Sergeant McLoughlin said, "Let's start concentrating, try to get each other out." And I kept, at that point, now the pain was really starting to end. And I'm like, "Sarge, I'm in a lot of freaking pain." And Dominic says, "I think I can get out of here." He still had his Scott air pack on. He got his helmet off. And when I tell you it was tight, it was really tight. Above me, there was only about that much room, or maybe about 18 inches from my face. It took Dominic a little bit, but he was able to shimmy out of his Scott air pack. And he literally had to crawl over my face. And he got into this little void area to my right. And he couldn't stand up. He was crouched at this point. And he looks up and he sees this hole. So he says, "Sarge, there's a hole up here. I think I can go up and get help." Sergeant McLoughlin, being a former ESU officer, said, "No, you can't. You need to get Jimeno out. Then you and Jimeno get me out. If you go up there, it's a debris field. You'll never find us again." So I got to be honest with everybody. We had a deep discussion at that point. Dominic said, "Will, I got a wife and kids at home." I said, "Bro, I got a wife and kid and a baby on the way." I said, so we talked a little bit, and Dominic did what I felt was the right thing. And the thing that I felt I knew I would have done, and I always say I hope I would have done, was he said, "Will, I'm going to get you out." So at that point, he turned around and he started to try to dig me out. Now, there was a big piece of concrete. There was this rebar that was wrapped around with a piece of concrete at the end of it. And Dominic was a strong guy. He lifted. I mean, the dude was strong. So he's taking this piece of concrete and with the rebar, and he would bend it back to try to get off me, and it would whip back and hit me. And this happened a couple times. And believe it or not, I tell people, we actually laughed down there because I said at one point, I said, "Bro, you're fucking kicking my ass." And he actually laughed. He's like, "I'm sorry, bro. I'm trying to get you out. I'm trying to get you out." And then it got bad because I remember, I could still see him. He sat down, literally sat on his ass and said, "I can't get you out." And I'm like, "Fuck, we're fucked. This is bad." And this took about, 15, 20 minutes. That's when we hear boom again above us. Same sound as before. Again, we don't know what's going on above us. So now today I know it's the second tower coming down. And that's when Dominic kind of got up, crouched, and turned toward me. And just stuff started coming in. And one of the things I've always done with my wife, Allison, and my little girl, Bianca, in sign language, I make the "I love you" sign. I love you. At that point, I said, "We're dead. We're done." So I took both my hands, I crossed them over my chest in the hopes that if they found me, they would tell my wife, "This is how we found them." So I never thought of my family from the beginning. It happened when I was about to die because it was always the mission to get people home. It was always the mission to take care of our team. And at that point, you realize it's over. And that's when I thought about my family. And that's when I looked over because we're all yelling now. Because now Sergeant McLoughlin is actually being crushed to the point, like I tell people, how a police officer's weapon is off the body. It's actually being pushed into his body. That's how much pressure he's under. And he's yelling really, really loud. I'm yelling. And Dominic yells really loud as I look. All I could see is this piece of concrete come in and hit him and sits him down and making the area that was even smaller. And I thought I was going to die. And it just, again, happened, seemed like forever. And then everything stopped. And we're in the dark again. And as light starts coming back in through that hole again, now I can see my buddy, and he's like literally right here next to me. And, he's bleeding out his mouth pretty profusely, and he's like, Willie, I'm dying, and I'm like, Dom, just hold on. In retrospect, I wish I would have thought about, hey, bro, grab your cell phone. Never thought about it. He had a cell phone in his pocket. I didn't even think about it. Although communication was bad that day, but you never know. But I wasn't thinking. And I'm just telling him, hold on. I'm in more pain. Sergeant McLaughlin's really yelling loud. And my focus is on Dominic. And Dominic's like, I'm dying, bro. And he actually cracks a joke and says to the Sarge, can I get a 3-8, which is Port Authority code for a break? Sergeant McLoughlin actually stops yelling and says, yeah, you can have a 3-8. And Dominic said, Willie, don't ever forget I died trying to save you guys. I said, Dominic, I would never let anybody forget that. At that point, he takes his sidearm out and he points it up into the air and fires around like a last-ditch effort for someone to say, hey, we're down here. And he just falls forward and dies. And he's only a couple feet from me. And that was tough because I started yelling. And I'm not going to lie, I was hysterical. I was like, Sarge, Dom's gone. Sergeant McLoughlin couldn't see, but he knew it was bad. And he said, you need to focus. You need to focus, save your energy, and try to see what you can do. And it took me a little bit to actually calm down. And I might try to make it a point not to look at Dominic. It was very difficult because he was right there. So I just kept trying to stay focused. And as time progressed, I'm trying to figure out what I can do because all I have exposed is my initial handcuffs and my sidearm. And no radio. I can't really move. And my body's starting to swell. And I remember just trying to yell as loud as I can. Look, I got a big mouth. I'm yelling, PAPD officers down, PAPD officers down. Nothing. And what I didn't realize was we were in the epicenter. We were between both towers. We had both towers land on us. And so at that point, I try to just keep trying to fight to try to get out. And soon after that, after Dominic passed, I don't know how long it was. Remember I told you I respect firefighters, don't want to be around fire. But being in the Navy and being on a ship that carried helicopters, I know what jet fuel is. I know what it does. I know what it smells like. And sure as shit, here come these fireballs falling down into this hole. I'm thinking, man, how bad can this shit get?
Yeah.
So these fireballs start coming in and they're landing by Dominic and they're rolling toward me and I can't move. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, once it catches my uniform, I'm going to be on fire. So I kept trying the best I could because you have to understand at this point, even though we weren't buried all that long, let's say an hour, your body is just exhausted. It takes everything to move. I mean, I was so thirsty. I was in a lot of pain. Movement was using up energy. But I would try to take dirt or whatever I could to try to put these fireballs out. But I knew it's jet fuel. It's not going to be put out. Somehow, some way, they kept falling in. They kept just putting themselves out. Later years, people told me, oh, there was a draft coming up. I don't know what it was. I look at it as I had a guardian angel. Yeah. But that happened for a while. And then all of a sudden I hear pow, 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 pow. And I'm like, what the fuck is that? And right above me, I see sparks. When I look, Dom's gun is going off. So the remaining rounds are shooting and they're shooting up toward my face. So I'm yelling, Sarge, I'm getting shot at.
Holy shit.
And I'm like, holy shit. So I take my hand and I cover my face because I'm thinking to myself, if a round hits my hand, maybe it'll stop. I knew better. It's going to go right through my hand. And I'm just like holding on for dear life. And the gun stops. And you could see the ricochets. And Sergeant McLoughlin goes, what the fuck is that? I'm like, the gun's going off. So the remaining 15 rounds go over my head. How they hit me, I don't know. And I remember it took me a while to kind of compose myself. Because at this point, I'm thinking, Jesus, we lost teammates. We've been crushed. Been burnt because I was starting to get burnt on my right forearm, been shot at. It's like, what else can happen?
Yeah.
So Sergeant McLoughlin, just always being a professional, said, keep yelling, keep trying to figure out a way to get out. So I started by taking out my first initial handcuffs, my first cuffs, and trying to break the concrete wall. But every swing I took so much energy. And after maybe 3 or 4 swings, I put them down. And when I went to look for him again, I couldn't, everything felt the same. So I asked Sergeant McLoughlin, Sarge, what's happening? What can we do? And he goes, Jimeno, there's been no book ever written for this, no training ever for this. This is going to come down to purely our will to survive. And he was straightforward. He goes, what's going to happen is we're going to suffer from compartment syndrome. And luckily for me, he was just such a good boss, well-versed, well-educated, that he understood the medical side. Like, our bodies are going to swell up. They're basically poison themselves. The muscle's going to die. If they don't get to us by tomorrow morning, we're dead. He was straightforward, which I appreciated. Hard to hear, but I appreciate it.
Yeah.
So we knew what we were up against. So he said, we got to try to get ourselves out of here or let someone locate us. So I said, my hands are starting to swell. He's like, that's part of it. We're going to start swelling. And as time progressed, my body started getting bigger and bigger. My hands started getting bigger and I couldn't feel anything. As the night progressed, I tried to get my sidearm out. And at the time, the Port Authority, we carried Smith & Wesson's 5946s. They're weapons that if we're rolling around with a perp, we can dislodge the magazine, the weapon will not fire, which is a great safety for us. Yeah. But the problem is, after hours, I was able to rock my weapon out, and now I'm pointing the gun up to the hole and pulling the trigger, but I forgot that I had taken the magazine out because I also used that to try to chip away. And I put that down, I couldn't find it. So when I pulled the weapon out to fire it, it was nothing but a hammer because I couldn't pull, it wouldn't fire.
Right.
So I took the gun, and it would take me everything to swing down and try to hit this concrete. Tried it 3-4 times, put the gun down, couldn't feel anything, you know. Later when they found me, and Scott will tell you, all that stuff was right there, but it felt like rocks to me. Yeah. It felt like the same as everything else. So, and it was hard for me to grip anything. So at that point, once I was exhausted, exhausted my options of the tools I had up to me, it was basically just how do I survive? As the night continued, it got really, really bad. I can't even describe how bad it was because as darkness came, I was really starting to lose hope. I remember at some point we hear Building 7 coming down. Now it's further out, but that fear came over us again.
Yeah, I can imagine.
And as night started falling, I remember just thinking to myself, and this is, I tell everybody, the most important part that I can teach somebody, you know, is that I wanted to give up. I wanted to die. You know, we had lost 3 teammates. My sergeant was in so much pain. We kept each other going by praying, talking about our families. You know, at one point I asked him, can you just put over the radio? His radio was working, but it was just static. So can you just put over the radio that Officer Jimeno wants his daughter to be named Olivia? Because me and my wife were at odds with the name. And I just said, I want her to name the baby after what she wanted, Olivia. And I always joke, women always win at the end anyway. But I did. I wanted that. And he put out a sentimental message to his family, hoping, because we didn't think we were going to make it. And at that point that evening, I had been so tired, so hurt, and had been fighting. And I was just so thirsty that I just wanted to die. So I said, God, I'm Catholic and I don't preach religion. I just tell people this is what happened to me. I said, God, thank you for 33 great years. I said, thank you for my beautiful wife that I would have had 6 years with, 4 years with my little girl. Thank you for my parents bringing me to this great country. And thank you for allowing me, if I'm going to die today, and that I die as a cop, you know, trying to do the right thing. And I remember just closing my eyes and saying, God, I'm going to ask you for 2 things. I'm going to ask you, one, to somehow, some way, let me see my little girl, Olivia, be born. Because I already in my mind knew Alice was going to name her that. And I said, I just want my mother-in-law and my mother to be with her because I know it's going to kill her not to have me there. And the second thing, I said, God, when I get to heaven, because I felt everybody's going to heaven that day. I don't care where you came from. I don't call them terrorists. I call them cowards. I said, when these cowards, what they did, they killed so many people. We're all going to go to heaven. And when I get to heaven, I said, I'm going to ask you for one more favor. And that's, can I have a glass of water? And you can laugh at this. Yeah. I always say, I want a glass of fucking water. I'm so thirsty. And I closed my eyes and I'll be honest with you, I was going to give up. I was just going to die. Yeah. And you can call it whatever you want, a vision, a dream. I see a person walking toward me. All my pain's gone. And I see a person walking toward me. No face, brown hair, a white glowing robe. And I know who it is. It's Jesus. He's walking toward me. And just all my pain's gone. Like I'm in a good place. And what does he have in his hand? And you can laugh. He's got a bottle of water. I don't know if it was Poland Spring Avion or whatever it was. But I snapped out of that dream. I snapped out of that vision with a desire to fight, continue to fight. And at that moment, I told myself, if I die, I would have given up on my sergeant, first of all, because nobody could hear him. I would have given up on my family because I didn't fight hard enough to get home. I would have given up on my country. But most of all, I would have given up on myself. And at that point, I said to Sarge with some colorful words, I said, Sarge, we're going to make it out of this fucking hellhole or we die on our terms. And this is something I share with people because especially my fellow law enforcement officers. It could be you're shot, you're stabbed, you're in a bad car accident, whatever it is. There are moments that you as a human being feel like, I can't. And I want you to push forward because yes, you can. And if at that moment I told myself, if I die tonight, I die because I died fighting. I didn't die because these fucking cowards. Because if I would have gave up and died, they would have won. And I said, no. At least, I don't know how to describe this, but there's a peace. And I think people who have cancer who fight understand that I'm gonna die on my terms. There's a certain peace about that you can go and say, I'm okay with that. And I made that decision that night. Like, if I'm gonna die, I'm gonna die knowing I gave everything I could. The next several hours were really, really bad. And all I can say was around, the only reason I know is because I asked the people that found me what time it was, because it was dark and I'm hearing in the distance, I thought it was hallucinating, United States Marine Corps, can anybody hear us? I'm like, holy shit. Did I hear that right? So I start yelling, PAPD officers down. And they said, if you hear us, yell or tap. And I couldn't really move my arms because there was a little pipe above me that I was trying to make noise earlier in the night, but it would take me 20 minutes to get my hands up just to drop the pipe down. Because at this point, we look like the Michelin Man. I mean, that's how loaded we were.
Yeah.
So I start yelling, PAPD officers down. They start coming. I hear a couple voices. It was 2 Marine reservists and a civilian. Jason Thomas, Marine reservist, Dave Carnes, a Marine reservist, and some civilian from Brooklyn, who I ended up talking to once on the phone later, who didn't even want any recognition. Wow. He's like, I was just there to help. They broke through the lines and are in the epicenter between the towers. I didn't know there was a hole to my left, a small hole. They get above me and they're shining a light down. I'm like, Sarge, they found us. It's the Marine Corps. So in my mind, being prior Navy, I'm thinking, we're at war. The Corps here. Yeah. We don't know what's going on because throughout the evening, when I think Building 7 went down, I think there was an army, there was on fire. Mm-hmm. So we heard gunshots. So we're thinking, man, our guys are shooting it out with the bad guys.
Oh, shit.
So they're there and they're shining down the light. And like I said, I was really thirsty and I'm waving this hand around. This is all I can do. I'm waving my left hand up toward this hole where the light's shining through. I'm not kidding you. It took about 5 minutes before they could see me. And I was getting aggravated. I'm like, what do you mean you can't? I'm fucking right here. They're like, we don't see you. I had become part of the building.
Right.
Oh. So I don't know where it came from, but I mustered enough spit to put it on the palm of the top of my left hand. And when I did that, they could see my skin. They're like, we got you. And I said, Sarge, they got us. And I said, please don't leave us. I told him, I'm prior Navy. He's like, no, we're not going to leave you, bro. They sent the civilian down the pile. And I guess he bumped into whoever. But that civilian told, I believe, a firefighter who ended up then bumping into Scott and ESU NYPD Truck 1 and said, hey, you got a couple cops stuck up there. And man, let me tell you, the cavalry came. And the Marines stayed above me. And I remember just feeling elation like, whoa, we're found. There's like people above us. After a while, I could, and Scott will talk to what was happening up there.
What time is this? If you could try to
it's about 8 o'clock because I asked the Marine.
8 a.m.?
Yeah, 8 p.m.
8 p.m.
that night. So at that point, we were already stuck for like 10 hours.
Okay.
So I had asked him, what time is it? And he said, 8 o'clock. I said, oh, and I realized how long we've been down there because I had no clue as to the time. Time just kept passing and we were just suffering the whole time. And they never said anything as to what happened. My whole goal was like, we need to get out of here and we need to get, in my mind, I'm like, we got to get Sergeant McLoughlin out of here first. He's older than me. He was in, I can't express to you the pain that he was in. It was difficult. His yelling was something that was ripping my heart out. And I was in pain, but his pain was brutal. And I just wanted to get to my sergeant. And I finally remember to my right, I can hear them coming. It's Scott. It's Chuck Sharika, who was a civilian, a former paramedic who came off the street and puts his life on the line to come in there. And I could hear Patty McGee behind him, Scott's partner. So all I could see is these 2 bald heads coming at me. And it's really tight. And I see Scott coming and I see Chuck coming. And like I said, I see 2 bald heads. They get to me. And man, it's been a long time since I had that feeling, like, wow, they're here. And I remember them getting to me. And I remember I started hyperventilating. I don't know how to explain this. And I think it's a good lesson to teach people that if you're an injured officer or injured firefighter or first responder, when your buddies get there, you feel like you want to just, okay, I'm good. I can give myself to them. But you can't. You got to still keep fighting. I started hyperventilating, and I remember Scott telling me, man, you need to calm down. And I felt like I was going to give myself a heart attack. He put a bag over me, and he told me, you need to still fight. You need to concentrate. And I remember that. And I calmed myself down. And the next step, I was thirsty. He gave me water. I mean, I was chucking water down to the point it wasn't good. Like, I need to calm down. And they finally started working on me. I remember, Scott telling me, hey, Scott Strauss, NYPD, ESU 1. And I didn't care. It's just a brother in blue. I mean, like, it just felt like, like your family was there, like, man, I'm in good hands. And, but I knew it was bad. The conditions were bad. And he said, we're going to try to get you out of here. We're going to get you out of here. He didn't say we tried. We're going to get you out of here. So him and Chuck started literally like groundhogs getting the debris out. He started working on me. And it took 3 hours, my operation. In that time, Scott and Chuck worked relentlessly. Patty McGee was throwing all the debris down the elevator shaft, which I think today, I'm pretty sure I can say, was what saved us. When the buildings came down, in retrospect, that elevator shaft is probably like a toothpick, but it landed to make that little void, which I think is what kept the rest of the stuff from crushing us completely. And these guys were fighting for their lives. Now, for whatever reason, me and Sergeant McLoughlin, we became accustomed to our environment. Like, I was breathing okay. Scott, Chuck, Patty were dying. They were taking whiffs out of my Scott Air Pack because they couldn't come down with Scott Air Pack. So I remember Scott taking whiffs out of my Scott Air Pack. And I just kept saying, man, these guys are dying. They're choking. They're coughing. They're being instructed from above to leave us because there's encroaching fire. They're like, you got to leave these guys. And, I think it was, Scott said, no way. But I know that Patty McGee's like, go fuck yourselves. No, we're not leaving these guys. And I remember at one point, they couldn't get my left leg out. And I remember looking up at the hole and I kept saying, man, I can live without a leg. And I wanted them to get to Sergeant McLoughlin first. And it's funny how your mind works. I never called him Sergeant. I said, you need to get to my partner first. So when Scott and them got there, when I said partner, they're thinking they see Dominic unfortunately passed. They're thinking this guy doesn't realize that his partner's dead. And Sergeant McLoughlin just shut up the whole time. And I remember when Scott first touched me, I was in so much pain, I yelled and he kind of backed off. And I remember I got to just eat the pain. And that's what I did. I just shut up and I cringed as he would touch things because I didn't want him to stop. And I knew time was of an essence, but I kept saying, you got to get to my partner first. And they're like, no, we got to get you out first, then we'll get your partner. But they're thinking this. So as time progressed that night, there was a point where they couldn't get my left leg out. I said, they had doctors up there to amputate us. So I said, Scott, just cut my left leg off, just get me out. I can live without a leg. And he goes, no, bro, we're getting you out of here whole. And I mean, I cannot express to you his courage, Chuck's courage, Patty McGee's courage. It was just, being told to leave. And then here's funny stories. One of the Marines, he's kind of an eccentric guy. His name is Dave Carnes. Scott says, has anybody got like something to cut a leg off with? He was, asking. And this guy's like, yeah, I got a K-bar knife. And Scott's like, what? No. We're talking like, a medical tool. He's like, no, K-bar knife, And that brought in some laughter. Believe it or not, we laughed a little bit down there. You have to. Because in a bad situation, that comic relief is something that allows, as a human being, to let that out. Even I was like, fuck, you're going to cut my leg off with a K-bar knife. But I was kind of like okay with it because I'm like, I really got to get out. And at that point, after that, I remember Sergeant McLoughlin saying, how's it going? And they freaked out. They're like, oh shit, who's that?
Yeah.
I said, that's my partner, because I never said sergeant.
Right.
And I said, that's my partner, my sergeant, Sergeant McLoughlin. What was really unique was at that point, Patty McGee and Scott Strauss said, John McLoughlin, they knew each other because they cross-trained as ESU officers.
Oh, wow.
I cannot express to you, I didn't know Scott, I didn't know Patty. But when I heard them say, John McLoughlin, it was like, this is family, man. This is who we are. And it's something that I try to instill when I go back to the Port Authority Police Academy to speak, is that we're family. I know there's politics. I know you become bosses, but when the shit hits the fan, we're family. We do a unique job, and we have to look out for each other. And that's what I felt at that moment. And it was really good because at that point they realized, hey, there's another person in here. We got to get to him. So they finally were able to extract me after a lot of hard work from Scott Strauss and Chuck and Patty. They finally were able to rip me out, and they got me and they started pulling me up the hole. I remember just saying, Sarge, hold on, you're next. I know that Scott was talking to John as I left. That gave me comfort that they knew him. And as I came out of the hole, I remember when I popped out of the hole, I looked up and I didn't see the buildings. I saw the moon, I saw a clear night. And that's when I said, where is everything? And a firefighter said, it's all gone, kid. That's the first time I cried that night. I didn't cry when the guys died. I didn't cry from my pains. I cried because I felt like we failed. There was so many people in that concourse area. And I just felt like we didn't get them home. And I remember they started passing me down this long line. And all I did was start grabbing patches and saying, thank. FDNY, NYPD, Port Authority, New Jersey, different municipalities, New York State troopers. All I could say was, thank you, thank you. And I remember they got me to one, and I see this oxygen Scott Air Pack looking over, and it's one of my classmates, Arnold Grant. And Arnold says, Jimeno. And we used to call him Devil Dog because he was a Marine. And I said, Devil Dog. He goes, yeah, bro, it's me. And I remember crying even more because now I bumped into someone I knew.
Yeah.
And now at this point, I'm thinking, is my body going to be able to last? I don't know. So they put me on the bus. They take me to Bellevue Hospital. And I cried again when they brought me off the bus, an ambulance, because all these doctors, this is like, I think just before midnight, all these doctors and nurses are standing around. And I'm like, where is everybody? That's what I said. And they're like, you're it. And I'm like, this can't be happening. They pulled me into the emergency room, and I remember they're buzzing above me like bees. The only thing that I can remember was one guy jumping up and saying, you're going to feel this. And he put the catheter in. I'm like, holy shit.
Oh, no.
And then I went out.
Yeah.
My wife made it to the hospital that night. I flatlined twice. The cop, Bruce Kent, good friend of mine, Port Authority cop, who was there the whole way, took my shield, took my necklace, my ID, was the guy that they told him, you got to go tell the wife that he passed because I had flatlined. And that as he was walking, I go, he's alive again. And then I flatlined again. And they told him again. And then they called him back again. He was white. My wife actually said when she met him, he was white. And he explained later why he was white, because he thought he was going to have to tell her I had died. I woke up the next day. I had a tube down my throat. I couldn't talk. I was really swollen. I could see rocks coming out of my lungs. And my main concern at that point was, God, please let me live long enough to tell them what happened. That's all I wanted at that point. My wife was next to me, which gave me comfort, but I'm like, I need to let them know what happened to Dominic, Antonio, Chris, the guys that I saw. Because if I die, nobody's going to know what they did. And I tried doing sign language. Like I said, I knew sign. I couldn't even move my hands. Yeah. Tried writing, couldn't do it. It took days till they were able to remove this this contraption down my throat that was literally sucking rocks out. The doctor had asked my wife, does your husband smoke? She goes, no, because my lungs, they told her, looked like I had been smoking for 30 years. Knock on wood, today I'm healthy. I still looking behind my shoulder to see when that ugly thing is going to show up like it has to so many of our brothers and sisters. My sergeant has suffered from some ailments. Thank God he's still on the good side. But, 9/11, people always ask me, Will, when do you get rid of 9/11? I said, for me, it'll be the day they bury me. Because not only the emotional, the post-traumatic stress was really something difficult for my family, but now also the health. I try to keep as healthy as I can, but you just don't know. But I always say I would never change my actions that day. My sergeant has a heavy heart. He lost men. And I tell him, I said, I could vouch for those guys. We would follow you right in again. We had a job to do that day. We try to do the best we can. People like to throw that word hero around. I'd say you're a hero till the end of the month, till the mortgage is doing the car bills. They don't care if you're a hero or not. They want the bills.
Right.
I said, all I can do, and as a survivor, I don't consider myself a hero. What I consider myself is a survivor who has an obligation to share a story, to remember those that we lost. We lost 37 Port Authority police officers, the most in law enforcement history, followed by 23 of our NYPD brothers and sisters. And of course, the firefighters and countless civilians. But my job as a survivor is to remember them and to teach other people the good of that day. You know, especially today in the world we live in, I want people to understand the saying that I always go by is Edmund Burke, a British philosopher, is all that evil needs to triumph is for good men to stand by and do nothing. Look at that. And I would say, I also include women today. Look at that. What are the chances that you have that on you?
So for those of you who are not able to watch on YouTube, I have a very large tattoo on my bicep.
Small bicep.
Yeah, of the Freedom Tower, as you can see, the Brooklyn Bridge, Lady Justice, and a large quote on my inner bicep, the one you just said. The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing.
And that's something I really believe in. And I tell everybody, even today where we're at, where, you know, cops are under attack, hold the line, because without you, there'd be total chaos. And I'm inspired because I still meet a lot of young men and women who want to be police officers. And I tell them, listen, God bless you. Because my first instinct is say, don't go into it. But then I say, one day my daughter might need help. And I need somebody who believes in the job like I did and believes in good. And that's why that quote is so important to us.
Yeah.
And, so I was fortunate. There's thousands of stories that day. You know, they ended up making a film about us called World Trade Center. Very proud of that film. But I always say, we're just a small slice of a very big day. We're some of the few people that were able to make it home. You know, we didn't find out. Of course, my sergeant came out the next morning at 7 a.m. And we didn't know till the following year when we went back to NYPD Truck 1 to thank them, that they're the ones that told us, do you guys know that you're the only two to survive from under it? And we're like, what are you talking about? You know, we were fighting for our lives for months. Nobody even knew about us. And we're the only two to survive from underneath.
Did you at the beginning, after you were out, suffer from any survivor's guilt?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's something that I can live with. In the beginning, it was horrible.
Yeah.
Why me? Why am I alive?
How did you cope with it? If somebody else was going through that,
I didn't at first. It was what was hurting my family. That was part of the PTSD.
Mm-hmm.
You know, once I was in a hospital for a very, very long time at Bellevue. Went through 13 operations. Thought I was going to die from blood clots. Then went on to Kessler Institute of Rehabilitation, West Orange, New Jersey, where I had to relearn how to walk. One of the positive things during that time was they told me when I was in rehab, if you work hard enough, we'll let you be there by the side of your wife to want to see your baby be born, which I would. Well, I did. I ended up November 26th, which is actually my birthday. My wife had a planned C-section, and I was able to be there for the birth of my child.
Awesome.
And you would think that was going to be something that helped. And it did in a small way, but I didn't even know. My wife tells me, later that you had PTSD from the moment you arrived home. I was suffering from survivor's guilt. I was suffering from, as a man, that I couldn't do anything for myself. I had to learn how to walk. I learned how to have to do everything by myself, over like a child. And that was very difficult. And I was angry. See, my PTSD comes in a range of different things. It could be depression, anger, all kinds of things, drinking, drugs. Mine was anger. I was angry that what happened to our country I was angry of the loss of my teammates. I was angry at what happened to me. And I didn't realize that I was projecting that to my family, even with a newborn. I was very short with everybody. I was very angry. And it was probably about a year later. And I was at this point now walking, but I was at home. And you would think, hey, here's a guy who survived 9/11, is living in his house, his job's taking care of him. He's got a new baby at home. But I was just not happy. And I remember one evening, I think it was I just couldn't find the remote. And I was yelling. I said, where the fuck's the remote? And my wife wasn't moving fast enough. And let me tell you, my wife she's an angel. What she's put up with me, and beautiful inside and out, but just a pillar of strength. And I say this to every officer out there, your family, they're an incredible support group. They wear the uniform too. They might not wear it physically, but they're wearing it. They're wearing that shield.
Yeah.
And I remember just yelling at her, and she wasn't moving fast enough. And I remember picking up a shoe, and I've never lifted my hand at a woman, and I was going to beam her. And as I went back to throw the shoe, I caught myself like, who are you? I remember dropping the shoe. I was embarrassed. I got in my truck, and I'm a big bow hunter. I love bow hunting. And she got me into it, believe it or not. But I went up to the country, and I sat there in a field that I usually hunted. I was supposed to hunt on September 11th, but I didn't take a PD. I went to work instead. And I'm watching the deer walk out. And I just started thinking to myself, what's going on? You survived this event and there's something wrong with you. And I knew something was wrong with me, but like being macho, and I always tell people, you know, and I don't claim this line. I got it from Mark Wahlberg on the movie Mile 22. Ego is not your amigo.
Yeah.
And I remember saying, I need help. I don't know what to do. And I said, you know what? I realized that if I'm not a good father, if I'm not a good husband, my children are going to suffer just like anybody who was a drug abuser or alcohol, their children suffer. So I made it a point to go home. I went upstairs and I went into the room of my 4-year-old girl, Bianca. And I said, Bianca, well, she was 5 at the time then. Does daddy yell a lot? She goes, yeah, dad, you scare me sometimes. At that moment, I made a decision. I'm going to start seeking help because I don't want the cowards to reach out and touch another generation of Americans. And then it started a long journey. It took me a long time. And I tell this to people with PTSD. You're not alone. There's many of us that feel that way. And it doesn't have to be to extreme because people come up to me, well, I can't think of anything worse than 220 stories hitting you. But everything in everybody's life is important. You found out you got cancer. You lost a loved one. You know, you got COVID. You're just being a cop today gives you PTSD.
Yeah.
Understand that you can overcome it, but you have to learn to live with these things. And that's what I had to accept. And it took about 3 different people from me talking to till the last person who unfortunately passed from 9/11 illness because she would be at the site looking out for the first responders. She's the one that told me, Debbie Mandel said to me, Will, we've been talking to each other for a couple of years now. You have to come to grips that you have PTSD. You're going to have to basically learn to live with it. You're going to have to learn how to control this. So for me, it was anger. So if I start getting hyped up, I need to tell myself something's wrong. My wife's always there to say, hey, you need to go take a walk. I found for me, the way I get rid of my PTSD or control it, well, you never get rid of it, I should say, but control it is I do something physical. I let that negative energy, whether it's hitting a punching bag, getting an elliptic machine, going for a walk, let that energy go somewhere. Maybe I'm lucky because I can't even think of someone who's depressed. What do? You have to find a way to overcome these challenges. And that's why I wrote the book, Sunrise to the Darkness, where I share my story. I do it in conjunction with Dr. Michael Moats, who's a doctor of psychology out of Colorado Springs, works with a lot of military people. And we wanted to show people that, yes, you can learn to live with your PTSD or any challenge you have. And my message to everybody is, yes, you can, and you deserve happiness. Don't ever think you don't deserve happiness. You know, if you're a cop today in New York City and we know what the situation is, you still need to be able on your off hours to go home, be with your family, and be happy. You know, don't take the job home with you. I know it's hard, but I want you to be happy because life is short. And I use this example with kids all the time. You know, we're born, right? If you're lucky to live till 90, that's 365 days in a year. You do the math. 365 times 90. It's not a lot of days on this life, in this earth, because part of the time you're in diapers when we're born. If you're lucky to live till 90, sometimes we're back in diapers. So that time is short. So that's why I ended up writing the book Sunrise to the Darkness, because I want people, especially first responders, to understand that we see a lot of bad things in our line of work. And sometimes these bad things have such an effect that our brothers and sisters end up taking their own lives. I don't want that for them. I want them to live as long as they can and flourish and be with their family members, you know, and enjoy their life. And it's a book that I've been blessed to have a lot of first responders give a lot of feedback to. And it's something that, you know, you can get on Amazon.com. I'm plugging the book. And I'll tell you what, please. I never wrote this book to make any money or fame. I wrote this book because I feel as a police officer, you know, you go to work every day. If you're lucky to help one person, you've done your job. I just hope that I can continue on as a survivor to say, hey, I'm serving those that I love the most, and that's other human beings. Because as a cop, that's what I wanted to do, was able to help other people around me. You know, and then on top of that, I wrote the second book, which is Immigrant American Survivor. It tells my story, which we've heard, but it tells it in a way where kids understand that they need to love this country because of our freedoms, no matter where they come from. And one of the things that I tell them is, you know, follow your dreams, go for your dreams, and don't let anything stop you. It took me 6 years to become a cop. And, you know, I'm very proud to say it took me 6 years. And I show them a love of police officers in this book. This is something important. I'd show them how first responders are so important, and I want kids to understand this. I'm grateful, here we are on sacred ground. Both these books are at the 9/11 Memorial Store and they're selling really well. And I'm doing my part as an American to make sure this future generation never forgets 9/11, but learns from 9/11. And that's the most important thing. So one, for children, to inspire them and let them know and understand our history. The other is to let those that I love the most, first responders, understand that they deserve happiness. And in this book, we have also lessons from Michael Moats. So if you're a person that doesn't want to go talk to somebody, which I understand, I didn't want to talk to anybody. There's exercise in there that will help you with your PTSD, with your darkness, to try to get you on the road to recovery, where you can get to someone and get one more day, one more week, one more year of life and find the way out of that darkness. And that's something I hope everybody does, because, we're all important. Remember that every story is important. Don't ever think that your story is not important, because an incident you might be in might not be major, but if you share it with other young cops, they learn from that. That's what I try to do when I go to the police academies, is teach them, God forbid you're in a situation like I was, don't give up, because it's easy to give up. We all know it's easy to give up. It's hard to fight. And in today's day and age, I want people to fight not only if they're in an incident, just going to work every day, you're fighting, with the stress of being a police officer, the lack of support from our government agencies. We're going to get through this, though. I promise you this. And this is something I feel so strongly about. If you're out there and you're wearing the shield and you're doing the job, we're going to get back to where common sense rules, where there's law and order, where there is respect for law enforcement, not where I was brought up that it's yes, sir, no, ma'am, especially to a police officer, a firefighter. And we've lost that somehow, some way. And that's unfortunate. But I believe that common sense will overrule the craziness, and that we're going to get back to respecting the men and women of blue that put their lives on the line every day for us. And I thank you. And I just want to say thank you to each and every one of you. I love you to death. I cannot express that enough.
So with that being said, first and foremost, Will, thank you for being on this podcast.
Story.
An unbelievable story. This book is probably more of my reading level, being that it's a children's book, and it has pictures, Eric. So
and it's illustrated by my co-author Charles Riccardi, who's awesome. I mean, the pictures are really great. That's one of the things that the teachers and the kids say they really like it. It's simple reading, but it really covers a lot of lessons.
I'm gonna take a read. I know you're donating this as part of our ongoing series of our guests donating pieces of themselves to our podcast, and eventually we're going to create a living museum with all the items that we collect throughout the hopeful years that we end up doing this. We'll have you sign this before you leave. What we're going to do now is we're going to end this show. We're then going to have a slight break in time. We'll take a few minute break, and then we're going to start up with the next episode, which is going to be episode 7, or AKA part 2, really, of this story. Right. Because we want to get Officer Strauss on here and have him tell his story of the actual rescue operation, of what was going on above you when you were down below. Death threw every bag of tricks at you that you could imagine. Shots fired, fireballs, an entire 2 buildings collapsing on top of you, and you're here to tell that story. If that isn't a piece of how to continue going for others who, like
it's
you
not
said,
a message to other people,
right?
To
Exactly.
survive.
Yeah, I don't know what is.
Yeah.
So again, thank you so much for telling that story. I know it's not easy, but you've been doing this now for 21 years almost.
It is, but it's today's a little tough. That's why I said I don't think I've teared up like that, because
you had me tearing up.
we're sitting
we're
sitting here under the buildings where I was buried, 21 years ago.
Yeah.
We're literally people ask me, how do you come back here? And I said, when I'm asked to do podcasts or events that are meaningful like this one, and it helps my fellow brothers and sisters, that's an easy, and it's tough though. It's tough coming back.
You're mere feet away from where you were. So.
Yeah, it brings us back to where we were that evening.
We have a Facebook page called the Muscle Room Podcast, where we allow the listeners to chime in after the show airs. I'll make sure to add you and Scott, of course, to that conversation. And I have a feeling that we're going to get a lot of comments.
This show is going
to
explode. This one.
And I know for a fact, because I myself being a relatively new police officer, I only have 8 years on the job. I know you said you don't like the word, but you're a hero to me after hearing this story. So I appreciate you, sure. Being here and telling me that story, because there's been plenty of times where I've wanted to give up every day almost, going through all this crazy, bullshit that we've been going through. But hearing your words of praise for the men and women in blue is really nice to hear. So I thank you for that. So what we're going to do is, again, don't go anywhere. We're going to release episode 8 a week after this one airs. So please stay tuned. We're going to take a few minute break. We're going to bring Scott, have him sit next to you. We're going to hear Scott's side of the story, and then we're going to wrap it all together at the end of episode 8. So again, thank you for listening to the podcast for episode 7, and we'll see you in a week for episode 8. Yeah. And we're going to wrap this all together.